Steve was sleeping in his small wooden cabin deep in the forest when he was suddenly awakened by a strange noise outside the porch. He quickly put on a jacket, opened the door, and froze when he saw a thin, exhausted bobcat standing unsteadily in front of him. Tightly wrapped around its neck was a white plastic ring cutting deep into its flesh, with blood and infection soaking through its matted fur. Within seconds, the frightened animal turned and disappeared into the misty forest. But what could have driven a wild creature, one that normally avoids humans at all costs, to come so close to Steve's home? Where did that plastic ring come from? And how long had the bobcat been suffering in the harsh wilderness? What Steve chose to do next was more than a simple act of kindness. It became a race against time to save a life. This story will leave you holding your breath as you witness the fragile line between despair and hope. Before we dive into this emotional rescue journey, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you love stories about compassion and nature. Now let's begin the true story of a bobcat and the man who refused to turn away when it needed help the most. The scent of pine and damp earth was Steve's morning benediction, a ritual as old as his creaking knees. A retired forest ranger, he found solace in the quiet dominion of his cabin, nestled deep within the whispering pines of the North Cascades. Coffee, black and bitter, warmed his hands as he watched the mist unravel, revealing the familiar contours of the woods he'd guarded for decades. It was a peaceful scene, one he'd come to cherish in the twilight of his years, until today. A flicker of movement, quick as a thought, caught his eye at the edge of the clearing. Too large for a rabbit, too small for a deer. His ranger instincts, dulled by time but never truly dormant, sharpened. He raised his binoculars, the familiar weight a comfort against his cheek. What he saw next stole his breath and twisted a knot in his gut. It was a bobcat, no mistaking those tufted ears and stubby tail. But this wasn't the wild, healthy creature he'd seen occasionally over the years. This one was a ghost, gaunt and wary, and around its neck, a white plastic ring, a cruel halo of human carelessness, had dug deep into its flesh. The sight was a punch to the gut, a cold dread washing over him. The plastic, likely from a discarded milk jug or soda bottle, had become a tightening noose, a slow, agonizing torture. He could almost feel the phantom ache in his own throat. He fumbled for his phone, his hands suddenly clumsy. The bobcat, a phantom in its own forest, seemed to sense his gaze, its head jerking up. Those emerald eyes, once symbols of the wild's untamed beauty, now reflecting only terror and pain. He managed a shaky, blurry photo, a fleeting glimpse of suffering, a desperate plea caught on a low-resolution screen. Then, with a twitch of its bobbed tail, the creature melted back into the emerald depths of the forest and was swallowed by the dense undergrowth, leaving behind only the indelible image of its suffering burned into Steve's mind. The peaceful morning had shattered, replaced by an urgent, gnawing ache. This wasn't just a wild animal. This was a living being in torment, and the responsibility for its fate, he realized, had just landed squarely on his shoulders. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Steve tried to go about his routine, feeding the birds, chopping wood, but the image of the suffering bobcat clung to him like burrs. He kept scanning the tree line, hoping for another glimpse, a sign that he hadn't imagined the horror. But the forest held its secrets close. The sheer helplessness, the inability to reach out and ease its pain, was a torment. He thought about the countless animals he'd encountered in his years as a ranger, how often human impact, often unintentional, caused such widespread suffering. This bobcat, this ghost in the pines, was a stark reminder. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't simply let this go. The search, he knew, had to begin. Days blurred into a single-minded quest. Steve walked the trails he knew intimately, leaving out bowls of water and small offerings of meat, hoping to lure the injured creature back into view. He talked to the trees, to the wind, whispering apologies and promises to the unseen bobcat. He felt foolish, perhaps, but the need to help was a driving force. The bobcat, however, remained elusive, a testament to its wild nature and the terror that likely fueled its evasiveness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of anticipation through him, only to be met with disappointment. He imagined the bobcat's fear, the instinct to flee, the constant thrum of pain, and it only solidified his resolve. Then one crisp afternoon, near a trickling stream, he found it. Not the bobcat itself, but a crude, makeshift den, hidden beneath a tangle of fallen branches. And near it, faint but unmistakable, the scent of fear and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. He knew then that the bobcat was still alive, still out there, suffering. The blurry photo on his phone, the specter in the pines, was now a tangible reality, and the urgency to act pulsed through him with renewed vigor. The actual rescue was a blur of adrenaline and quiet desperation. It took 2 days of careful tracking and baiting, and the help of a local wildlife rescue expert Steve called in to finally corner the terrified bobcat. The moment the dart found its mark, the creature's desperate struggle ceased, replaced by a gradual relaxation, a heavy stillness. Steve watched, his heart hammering, as the team carefully approached, a net at the ready. He saw the bobcat's body, thin and weak, and the terrible wound around its neck, even worse up close than he'd imagined. The plastic had indeed cut deep, festering, a silent testament to its prolonged agony. As they gently lifted the unconscious animal into a specialized crate, a profound wave of relief washed over Steve, quickly followed by a sense of responsibility. This was just the beginning. The bobcat, now named Shadow by the rehab team due to its elusive nature, spent the next few hours in a dazed, medicated sleep. Steve stayed at the rescue center, watching through the glass, his throat tight. He saw the veterinarian meticulously clean the wound, inject antibiotics, and apply a fresh bandage. He saw the careful, gentle hands of the technicians as they monitored Shadow's breathing, checked his pulse, and offered small sips of water. For Shadow, the initial confusion of being captured, the strange smells, the towering figures, slowly began to morph into something else. The sharp sting of the needle was followed by the strange warmth of a blanket, the cold, unwelcome touch of human hands, replaced by a comforting, rhythmic pulse of quiet care. The thirst that had been a constant companion was quenched by clean, cool water, leaving a pleasant wetness on his tongue. The giant figures, once terrifying, now moved with a deliberate gentleness, their voices soft, their presence no longer a threat. The overwhelming pain in his neck had lessened, replaced by a dull ache, and the tight, suffocating ring was gone. A profound weariness settled over him, but beneath it, a faint, unfamiliar stir of something new. Safety. The ghost in the pines was beginning to feel the first tender whispers of trust. The world had shrunk to a relentless ache. Every breath, every shift of weight sent a jarring jolt through her already exhausted frame. The plastic ring, once a mere annoyance, was now a constant, suffocating caller, chafing her neck raw and making the simple act of swallowing a painful, impossible feat. Hunger, a dull throb yesterday, had sharpened into a gnawing agony that consumed her thoughts, overriding every instinct except the primal urge to survive. Her movements, once fluid and silent, were now jerky, hesitant. She stumbled through the undergrowth, each twig a fresh challenge, each rustle of leaves a potential threat her weakened senses struggled to interpret. The once familiar scents of the forest, damp earth, pine needles, and the distant musk of deer, were muted, overshadowed by the metallic tang of fear and the acrid smell of her own desperation. Her fur, usually sleek and well-groomed, was matted and coarse, catching on thorns and burrs, pulling at her already tender skin. A low growl, more a rattle in her throat than a sound of aggression, escaped her. It was directed at nothing in particular, merely an expression of the overwhelming misery that coursed through her. The sun, a warm comfort just days ago, now beat down with impressive weight, was draining what little energy remained. She sought the dappled shade beneath a thick oak, collapsing in a heap, her sides heaving with effort. The world tilted and swayed, a dizzying spiral of green and brown. Her vision blurred, the edges of the leaves shimmering in a distorted haze. She could no longer distinguish the chirping of crickets from the frantic thumping of her own heart. A sudden snap of a twig nearby sent a jolt of terror through her, but she barely had the strength to lift her head. Her ears, usually swiveling to catch every nuance of sound, lay flat against her skull. The smell of something different, something big and unsettling, wafted on the faint breeze. She wanted to run, to disappear into the familiar shadows, but her legs were leaden, unresponsive. A colossal shadow fell over her, blocking out the meager light. A deep voice rumbled, soft and low, a strange sound that grated against her already frayed nerves. She instinctively tried to flatten herself further into the dirt, a desperate attempt to become invisible. Then came the sudden, jarring lurch, the cold, hard metal of the trap closing with a metallic clang that echoed in her ears. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her. She thrashed against the confines, her weakened body struggling against the unyielding bars, each futile effort sending waves of exhaustion crashing over her. The plastic ring dug deeper, a fiery circle of pain. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of the towering being outside, who was now moving closer, his shadow enveloping her entirely. A net, soft yet firm, was draped over the trap, plunging her into a sudden, suffocating darkness. A sharp sting, brief but intense, pulsed in her hindquarter, followed by a sudden, overwhelming warmth that spread through her limbs. The world began to spin in slow motion, the edges blurring, the sounds receding into a distant hum. The terrifying jostling stopped. She was lifted gently, impossibly, and then a new sensation, a soft, yielding surface beneath her. A distant voice, still low, spoke again, this time with a different quality, a soft urgency that for the first time didn't sound like a threat. The plastic ring in agony for so long was being manipulated, pulled, and then a miraculous release. A rush of air, cool and sweet, filled her lungs. The gnawing ache in her throat, a constant companion, began to subside, replaced by a strange lightness. She drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first true rest she'd known in what felt like an eternity. The world had become a kaleidoscope of shifting fears, a relentless pursuit of the next safe shadow. My body, a map of dull aches and throbbing pains, moved on instinct alone. The scent of rain, a distant promise, was a cruel tease. My ribs were a cage of their own, each breath a sharp reminder of the emptiness within. Then, a new sensation, a sudden, blinding flash. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind a persistent, buzzing hum in my ears and an even deeper sense of unease. The giant, the one with the gentle voice and the strange metallic scent, was there again. But this time, he was holding a small, flat rectangle that pulsed with an internal light. I froze, my muscles tensed for flight, but my legs felt like lead. Steve stared at the grainy photograph on his phone, a stark depiction of the Bobcat's plight against the encroaching darkness of the woods. He'd taken it moments before the phantom feline had vanished again, and now he meticulously typed out his plea, each word a desperate cry into the digital ether. He posted it on the local wildlife forum, a quiet corner of the internet usually reserved for sightings of deer or debates about invasive species. Ghost Cat, he'd titled it, a tribute to its elusive nature and the haunting image he carried in his mind. He hit send, a knot tightening in his stomach, and then he waited. The response was almost immediate. A ripple, then a wave, then a tsunami. His phone, usually so quiet, vibrated relentlessly. Comments poured in, an outpouring of empathy and outrage that warmed Steve's calloused hands. "Oh, that poor darling," one person typed, followed by a string of crying emojis. "We have to do something," another exclaimed. People shared similar stories of human impact. A hawk caught in fishing line, a fawn hit by a careless driver, a fox with a leg caught in a snare. Each story, a stark reminder of the delicate balance between their world and ours. The online community, usually a collection of polite acquaintances, transformed into a unified force. They shared advice, offered resources, and even proposed search parties. Then a name appeared, a beacon in the digital storm: Dr. Evelyn Reed. Steve recognized it instantly. A retired veterinarian, known in these parts for her quiet, unwavering dedication to wildlife. She had nursed countless injured creatures back to health before disappearing from public practice a few years ago. Her message was concise, direct. "Steve, I saw your post. That bobcat needs help, and fast. I'm volunteering. Let me know what you need." Hope, a fragile thing, began to unfurl in Steve's chest. Meanwhile, I felt the familiar ache in my belly intensify, a gnawing emptiness that overshadowed even the fear. The air tasted different now, sharper, carrying the scent of humans, but also something else, something sweet and metallic. My instincts screamed danger, but my body was slow, heavy. I flattened myself against the cool earth, trying to disappear. But the giant, the one called Steve, was close, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't chasing, not like the others. He just watched. The next morning, the giants were back. More of them this time. Their movements were slow, deliberate, but their sheer size was terrifying. One of them, a smaller giant with hair the color of snow and a quiet, steady gaze, approached carefully. She held something that smelled strange, a sweet, cloying odor that made my nose twitch. My instincts warred with my hunger. My body was screaming for sustenance, but my mind was screaming danger. A small dish filled with something that smelled of meat was placed carefully on the ground, just out of reach. I watched, every muscle coiled, ready to bolt. The smaller giant, Evelyn, moved away, her movements slow, gentle. The hunger won. I crept forward, snatching a piece of the offering, the taste a revelation, before retreating back into the shadows. This happened again and again. Each time the offerings were closer, the giant's movements calmer. My fear began to fray at the edges, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The food was always good, rich and satisfying, something I hadn't known in weeks. They would talk in soft murmurs, their voices a soothing drone, and not threatening shouts. One day, a giant left behind a blanket, soft and thick. I eyed it suspiciously for hours before the cold drove me to curl up on it. The warmth was a revelation, a comfort I hadn't felt in a long, long time. The harshness of the past, the biting wind, the empty belly began to recede, replaced by these small, unexpected kindnesses. The biggest giant, Steve, was always there, a constant, reassuring presence. He would sit, sometimes for hours, simply observing. His scent, once a warning, now held a strange familiarity, a sense of quiet calm. He never tried to grab me, never rushed. He just was. It was a new experience of this non-threatening presence. Slowly, painfully, a fragile seed of trust began to sprout in my wild heart. The small giant, Evelyn, eventually brought a strange, long stick. It made a soft click, and then a quick, sharp sting in my flank. Panic flared, my body arching in protest, but the pain was fleeting, quickly replaced by a strange lethargy. My limbs felt heavy, my eyelids drooped. The world began to blur around the edges, becoming soft, indistinct. I fought it, tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body was lifted gently into a soft, enclosed space. It smelled of clean fabric and antiseptic, not the harshness of the forest floor. The giants' voices were hushed, their movements careful. I was still conscious, but my senses were dulled, as if observing the world through a thick veil. I felt hands on me, soft and methodical, checking my fur, feeling my ribs. There was a gentle probing, a cleaning. A warm, wet cloth wiped away the dirt and the tangles from my fur. The touch was not threatening, not rough, but soothing. The pain in my belly, a constant companion, receded further, replaced by a strange, tingling warmth. A soft blanket was draped over me, and the world went dark, but not in a frightening way. It was a dark full of warmth, of safety, of something akin to peace. The community's swift and passionate response, sparked by Steve's online plea, had transformed a solitary concern into a shared mission, and I, the ghost cat, was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be seen and to be saved. Days had bled into agonizing nights, each tick of the old grandfather clock in Steve's cabin a testament to the Bobcat's cunning intelligence, a whisper of the wild's refusal to be easily tamed. Dr. Reed, her face etched with a quiet intensity, moved with Steve through the pre-dawn chill, their breath pluming white against the deep indigo sky. The air hummed with unspoken hope and a gnawing fear that tightened Steve's chest. Fear that they were too slow, too human in their approach to a creature born of instinct and shadow. They had meticulously planned, moving like ghosts in the early hours to set the camouflaged live trap. It was near the south side of Steve's cabin, a place where the Bobcat, whom Steve had now affectionately started calling Rusty in his head due to a faint reddish tinge he'd observed in its fur, had been seen lurking near the fresh water source. The bait, a fresh piece of venison, lay tempting within, a silent invitation to a hungry, wounded predator. Rusty, Steve knew, wasn't just any wild animal. It carried the weight of past trauma, making it both more vulnerable and infinitely more wary. Its intelligence, a razor-sharp survival tool, demanded extreme patience, a quality Steve possessed in spades but which now felt stretched thin by the urgency of the situation. Days passed, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the quiet disappointment of checking the trap only to find it empty, or worse, to find a startled raccoon or a trembling rabbit, quickly released back into the woods. Each false alarm was a tiny jab, a reminder of Rusty's elusive nature, fueling their fear that the Bobcat might not survive much longer out there, its injuries likely festering. The Bobcat, its name a secret held only by Steve's anxious heart, felt the vibration of the giant's clumsy feet even before the scent of unfamiliar metal reached its keen nose. It was a low thrum against the earth, a disruption in the forest's natural rhythm. Its paw, still tender from the sharp pain that had jolted it days ago, a pain the Bobcat didn't understand but recognized as danger, made it hesitant. It had found a rhythm of sorts in its pain, a way of moving that minimized the throbbing, a testament to its innate resilience. The taste of clean, cold spring water, savored drop by drop, had been a fleeting comfort after days of a parched throat, a memory of thirst that still lingered, making the thought of another drink a potent lure. But this new scent, mingling with the tantalizing aroma of fresh meat, felt wrong. It was a delicious promise, yes, but laced with something else, a strange metallic tang that raised the hackles along its spine. Days blurred into a cycle of near misses and growing frustration. The Bobcat, Rusty, was always a step ahead, a fleeting shadow, a whisper in the wind. Steve and Dr. Reed often found fresh tracks leading right up to the trap, then veering off sharply as if the wild creature could sense their presence, their desperate intent. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable weight pressing down on them. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a profound test of human perseverance against the raw, unyielding instinct of the wild. Each morning, checking the empty trap, a new wave of fear washed over Steve. He pictured Rusty, alone, in pain, vulnerable. The contrast between the Bobcat's past, a blur of harshness and desperate survival, and the gentle care they so desperately wanted to offer, gnawed at him. He knew that, if they could only get Rusty into their care, the pain would slowly turn into relief, the fear into a burgeoning trust. But first, they had to catch it. The constant throbbing in its paw was a dull companion, a reminder of its vulnerability. The Bobcat flattened itself against the cold earth, its short tail twitching. It watched the giants with their strange, quiet movements. They smelled of something warm and vaguely comforting, like the sun on a rock, but also of something new and unsettling. It had seen the curious metal box, draped in leaves, smelling faintly of a delicious, forbidden meal. Its belly rumbled, a deep, insistent ache, but something deep within, an ancient voice of caution, screamed defiance. It remembered the sharp, overwhelming pain from before, the terrifying confinement, the helplessness. It remembered how the world had twisted and turned, how everything had become a blur of fear and confusion. The giants were big, their shadows vast and intimidating, but their movements were slow, deliberate, almost gentle. Yet the memory of that past sting, that overwhelming pressure, kept its instincts sharp, its wariness an impenetrable shield. As another sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Steve and Dr. Reed walked back to the cabin, the silence between them heavy with unspoken worry. The bobcat, Rusty, remained free, a testament to the wild's enduring spirit, its fierce independence. This protracted dance, this delicate negotiation between human intervention and natural instinct was the very heart of wildlife rescue. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about earning its trust, about bridging the chasm between two worlds. The test of human perseverance continued, as did the bobcat's struggle for survival. They knew that somewhere out there, Rusty was still fighting, and they would not give up. The piercing clang of metal on metal ripped through the otherwise silent night, a sound so jarring it yanked Steve from the depths of sleep with the force of a physical blow. He shot upright in bed, heart hammering against his ribs, the noise reverberating in his ears. It was the trap. It had to be. A sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through him, a potent cocktail of hope and dread. He flung himself from the bed, fumbling for his jeans, his mind already racing ahead, envisioning the possibilities. A breakthrough or a heartbreaking failure if it was empty, or worse, if something had gone wrong. He raced outside, the cold night air biting at his exposed skin, his breath pluming in the crispness. His flashlight beam cut a swathe through the darkness, dancing across the familiar shapes of the yard until it landed on the large live trap he'd set. His breath hitched. It was sprung, and inside, huddled in the far corner, was a bobcat, a small, emaciated bobcat. Her golden eyes, wide with primal fear, stared back at him, reflecting the harsh light of his flashlight like twin embers. She was terrified, a wild spirit caged. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, her tiny body trembling. He could see the stark outline of her ribs beneath her sparse, matted fur, in a patch of dried blood near her left flank, a fresh wound, or an old injury worsened by her struggle. Her condition was severe, even more so than he had anticipated from the trail camera footage. A wave of intense relief washed over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He'd done it. He'd captured her. But this relief was instantly tempered by a profound, agonizing anxiety. The true extent of her injuries, her suffering, was now horribly apparent. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a desperate race against time. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this moment was a critical turning point for her, for him. The bobcat, Willow, as he'd instinctively begun to call her in his mind, felt a rush of overwhelming sensations. The sudden, jarring clang, the metallic prison closing around her, had sent a jolt of pure terror through her. Her heart pounded against her fragile ribs, each beat a frantic drum. The world had gone from the familiar, if harsh, freedom of the night to a confining, rattling box. A giant, hulking shadow now loomed over her, a blinding light searing into her eyes, making the darkness even more absolute beyond its reach. Her instincts screamed danger, threat, a predator far larger than herself. She flattened herself against the wire, trying to disappear, to become invisible, her muscles taut, ready to bolt though there was nowhere to go. The air inside the cage smelled of metal and something else, something alien and sharp. Steve spoke to her in a low, soothing voice, words she couldn't understand, but the gentle cadence of which seemed to cut through the sharp edge of her terror. He covered the trap with a thick blanket, dimming the terrifying light, creating a small, dark haven within her metal prison. The sudden dimness was a small reprieve, a momentary easing of the intense pressure. She could still hear the giant moving, could smell his presence, but the visual assault was lessened. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was a step back from pure panic. Carefully, so carefully, Steve managed to transfer her, still in the trap, into a larger, more secure pet carrier wrapping the entire thing in blankets to muffle the sounds and block the light. The vibrations of movement, the jostling, were unsettling, making her stomach clench. Her injured flank throbbed with each movement. She whimpered, a low, guttural sound she hadn't made in years. The world outside her cage was moving, blurring. She was being taken somewhere new, somewhere unknown. Fear turned into a dull ache in her muscles, a constant thrumming anxiety. The smell of the giant was now pervasive, mixed with other unfamiliar scents. The next sensation was a prick, a sharp sting on her haunch that made her tense, but then a strange warmth. A heavy languor began to spread through her limbs. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her frantic thoughts began to slow. The world softened around the edges. She was lifted gently and placed on a cool, hard surface. More giants, their voices softer, calmer, moved around her. There were more pokes, more prods, but the sedating warmth dulled their impact. She felt a small, cool sensation on her paw, then a comforting pressure, and later the delicious, clean taste of water on her tongue, offered not in a rush, but slowly, patiently, after what felt like days of burning thirst. The gentle touch of a soft cloth on her matted fur, cleaning away the grime and the tangles, was initially alarming, but then surprisingly soothing. The pain in her flank, her leg, was still there, a dull ache, but the sharpness had been blunted. When she awoke, truly awoke, she was in a different kind of cage, one with soft bedding and the comforting scent of clean things. The light was gentle, diffused. A bowl of clean water sat nearby, and a small portion of soft, tempting meat. She watched the giant, Steve, approach, his movements slow, his eyes, so large and brown, no longer threatening, but filled with a quiet concern. He spoke in that same soft cadence. He placed the bowl of meat down, then retreated a safe distance. Her hunger was immense, a gnawing emptiness she'd lived with for so long. She eyed the food, then the retreating giant, then the food again. Hesitantly, tentatively, she edged forward, her body still stiff, still sore. The meat was soft, rich, a luxury she hadn't tasted in months. As she ate, slowly, deliberately, the last vestiges of raw terror began to recede, replaced by a cautious, nascent sense of something entirely new. Safety, a fragile flicker of trust born from the pain turning into relief. The harshness of the outside world, replaced by gentle care, began to bloom in the deep, shadowed corners of her wild heart. Under the urgent glow of emergency lights, a delicate dance against death was beginning. The strange, comforting darkness had been snatched away, replaced by blinding white and an incessant hum that vibrated through the makeshift cage. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of pain. The air smelled of antiseptic and something metallic. The scent of fear, perhaps, but not just mine. I could sense it in the towering giants moving around me, their voices low, edged with a frantic energy that mirrored the thumping in my own chest. My neck throbbed, a relentless fire that had consumed me for what felt like an eternity. A new giant, smaller and softer in her movements than the first, arrived. Her scent was different too, clean, clinical, yet overlaid with something comforting, like the rich earth after a rain. They lifted me, the movement jarring, sending new waves of agony through my neck. Then a strange prick, a fleeting sting, and the world began to soften, the edges blurring. The fire in my neck, though still present, dulled to a distant ember. I was placed on a cold, hard surface, but a soft cloth was tucked beneath my head, a small gesture that penetrated even my drug-induced haze. The first giant, Steve, spoke in a low rumble, his words a comforting drone as the new giant, Dr. Reed, began to examine me. Her touch was gentle, methodical, and surprisingly free of the fear I usually encountered in humans. My instincts screamed danger, yet something in her movements whispered care. The plastic ring, the insidious tormentor, was a source of unimaginable pain. I tried to rip it off, scratch it, rub it against every rough surface I could find, but it clung with a malicious tenacity, tightening with every desperate effort. Now, as Dr. Reed's gloved fingers probed gently around it, I felt a new kind of relief, a phantom sensation of something being done. The cool air on my exposed skin, the gentle wiping, the subtle tugging, it all pointed to a singular, hopeful act. The ring, my nightmare, was finally gone. I felt the phantom weight lift, a deep, primal sigh of relief even in my drugged state. Then came the cleaning, the sting of a liquid, followed by a soothing coolness. She worked with a focused intensity, her breath shallow, her concentration absolute. The wound I knew was deep, a raw testament to weeks of neglect and suffering. The rhythmic pull and release, a delicate dance of needle and thread, continued. I felt the tiny pricks, not painful, but distinct, each one a step away from the open wound that had been my constant companion. It was strange, this blend of human intervention and my wild nature. My instincts still screamed caution, but the overwhelming relief, the softening of the pain, began to chip away at the ingrained fear. I was severely dehydrated, every cell in my body screaming for water, a deep thirst that had made hunting an impossible, exhausting task. My ribs were prominent, a stark reminder of the starvation that had gnawed at me from the inside out. I felt a cool, metallic sensation as a needle entered my paw, followed by a soothing warmth spreading through my veins. Fluids, they called it. To me, it was life, returning slowly, steadily. The world swam in and out of focus. Giants spoke, their voices a comforting murmur, and the soft cloth beneath me felt like a cloud. The immediate searing pain had receded, replaced by a dull ache, a promise of healing. My internal alarm system, perpetually screaming danger, was slowly dialing down. The gentle touches continued, a human hand stroking the soft fur on my head. A warmth that was foreign yet not entirely unwelcome. They were tending to me, not as prey, but as something precious. This was a new sensation, a bewildering shift in my existence. My body, ravaged by weeks of suffering, was beginning to find a fragile peace. The emergency medical intervention, Dr. Reed had called it. For me, it was simply survival. Every breath felt like a victory. Every beat of my heart a testament to the strange, powerful magic of these giants. The darkness had been harsh, the world outside cruel, but here, in this unfamiliar place, a fragile seed of trust was beginning to sprout. The air was clean, the voices soft, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the relentless fire in my neck was nothing more than a fading memory, a phantom ache that whispered of what I had endured and what I was now escaping. The faint scent of food, a delicious, meaty aroma, drifted through the air, stirring a hunger so deep it was almost painful. My stomach rumbled, a small sound in the vast silence of my healing. Perhaps, just perhaps, the long night was finally over. The world was a blur of rough hands and terrifying noises, a chaotic symphony of fear. The scent of ozone and something metallic, like blood, filled the Bobcat's nostrils, sharp and acrid. Her body throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that pulsed with every terrified beat of her heart. She was a creature of the wild, and this small, confined space, these giant, unfamiliar beings, were anathema to her very existence. Even after the burning pain in her leg had been muted, replaced by a strange, numb warmth, the terror remained. A cold knot in her belly. She bared her teeth, a silent snarl of defiance that she hoped would keep these towering figures at bay. Their voices were low, rumbling sounds like distant thunder, but she heard no kindness in them, only an impending threat. For weeks, the clinic became her unwilling prison. The Bobcat, who Steve and Dr. Reed had tentatively started calling Ember, after the fiery glint in her eyes, learned the rhythm of her new, strange existence. The soft bedding felt alien against her wild fur, far from the cool earth or the dry leaves of her den. The food, though it filled her empty belly with a richness she hadn't known in ages, tasted bland compared to the thrill of a fresh kill. Each day brought the giants closer. A large, gruff man who smelled of old wood and something vaguely comforting would peer through the wire mesh, his voice a low murmur she couldn't decipher. The smaller, sharper-smelling giant who carried the stinging needle was the one she trusted even less. Ember would hiss, a guttural warning rip from her throat, her tail lashing back and forth. A furious whip of spotted fur whenever they approached. The physical wounds on her leg, a jagged tear from some unseen ordeal, were slowly mending, the skin puckering and knitting together under the watchful eyes of the giants. But the wounds within, the invisible scars of fear and abandonment, remained raw and open. They festered, making her lash out, making her retreat further into herself, a tight coil of suspicion and defiance. One afternoon, a different giant approached. This one moved with a slow, deliberate grace, and her scent was less sharp, more earthy. She placed a small, dark red piece of meat just inside the cage door, and then retreated, not too far, but far enough. Ember watched it, her senses on high alert. The scent of the meat was intoxicating, a primal lure that warred with her ingrained fear. Her stomach rumbled, a deep, painful ache she had learned to ignore. But the hunger, this clean, fresh hunger, was relentless. After what felt like an eternity, her caution gave way. She crept forward, a low-slung predator, snatching the morsel with a swift, practiced movement before retreating to the furthest corner, devouring it in a few hurried bites. It was a small victory, a crack in the wall of her distrust. But it was there, and the giant watched, her gaze unthreatening, almost soft. Days bled into weeks. The giants continued their patient assault on her defenses. The gruff man, Steve, would sit by her cage, sometimes reading aloud from a book, his voice a soothing drone that became a strange kind of comfort. He never tried to touch her, never forced anything. He just was there. She still hissed, still bristled, but the intensity of her fear was slowly, imperceptibly softening. Her wounds, once angry gashes, were now healing scars, thin lines on her otherwise perfect fur. The physical pain had receded, replaced by a dull awareness, a phantom ache that reminded her of where she'd been. But the deeper pain, the fear that coiled in her gut, was much harder to dislodge. It was a fortress built over years of hardship, of needing to be constantly on guard. One morning, Steve approached her cage, not with food, but with a small, soft blanket. He draped it gently over a corner of her space, far from her reach, then sat down, as he always did. Ember watched him, her tail still, her ears swiveling, trying to decipher his intentions. The scent of the blanket was unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting, like sun-warmed earth. It took hours, but eventually, curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of nascent trust, won out. She nudged it with her nose, then slowly, tentatively curled up on it, the soft fabric a novel sensation against her body. It was a tiny step, a whisper of a bridge across the chasm of her fear. But for Steve, watching from a respectful distance, it was a monumental leap, a silent testament to the fragile, painstaking process of earning the trust of a wild heart, a heart that bore unseen scars far deeper than any physical wound. The journey to truly heal Ember was only just beginning. Slowly, painstakingly, a bond began to form. It was less a spark and more a microscopic flicker in the vast darkness of fear, fueled by the relentless, gentle persistence of the giant humans. A persistent ache thrummed in the Bobcat's body, a constant, dull reminder of the world she had known, a world of sharp pains and empty hunger. She remembered the blinding flash of light, the terrifying sensation of being scooped up by unseen forces, the overwhelming smell of strange things. Now there was a different kind of strangeness. These giants moved slowly, their voices low, rumbling sounds that didn't carry the usual threat. The tall one, Steve, would sit outside her enclosure, just beyond the mesh, for what felt like endless stretches of time. He didn't try to touch her then, he just sat, his presence a steady, unmoving weight in her peripheral vision. Sometimes another giant, the one with the soft hands and the strange metallic smells, Dr. Reed, would come. She would speak in those low, rumbling sounds that didn't grate against the Bobcat's sensitive ears. And then there was the food. not the scraps she used to scavenge, sometimes rotten, often fought for. This food was different. It smelled rich, meaty, and appeared as if by magic in a clean bowl. The first few times, she waited until they were gone, darting out to devour it in a frantic rush, a desperate act of survival. But the consistency of it, the unwavering supply, began to chip away at the edges of her ingrained suspicion. The water, too, was always fresh, cool against her parched tongue, a stark contrast to the stagnant puddle she once sought. Days bled into weeks. The dull ache in her body subsided, replaced by a subtle strengthening. The initial sting of the tiny needles, sharp and sudden, had always been followed by a strange, sleepy warmth, a lessening of the deeper pains. Her body, once gaunt and bony, began to fill out, the contours of muscle returning. The wounds where her fur had been torn and skin broken started to itch with the new growth, a sign of healing. One afternoon, as Dr. Reed moved slowly, carefully, within the enclosure to refresh her water, a primal instinct screamed at the bobcat to flee, to lash out. But something held her. The giant's hands were gentle, movement slow. No sudden lunges, no loud noises, just a soft, continuous murmur. The bobcat froze, every muscle tensed, ready to spring. The giant's hand, so large and pale, moved past her, not to grab, but to replace the water bowl. And then for a fleeting moment, a finger, soft and warm, brushed against her flank. It was a feather-light touch, so unexpected it didn't trigger an immediate aggressive response. Instead, a strange ripple went through her. Not fear, not pain, but something new. Curiosity, perhaps. Later, Steve was there again, sitting outside talking in his low rumble. He held out his hand, palm open, not directly at her, but nearby. He did this often. She had ignored it. But today, the memory of Dr. Reed's soft touch lingered. The giant's hand was still, unthreatening. An instinct, long buried beneath layers of trauma, began to stir. A tentative step, another. Her nose twitched, sampling the unfamiliar scent of the human. She hesitated, her muscles coiled, ready to retract, but the hand didn't move. It just stayed, unwavering. And then a tremor, an almost imperceptible shift in her own body. Slowly, painstakingly, she stretched her neck, her rough chin brushing against the giant's skin. A silent acknowledgement, a fragile bridge across the chasm of fear. A nuzzle, a moment suspended in time, where the harshness of her past began to recede, replaced by the warmth of a touch. It was more than just a gesture, it was a surrender, a tentative whisper of trust in a world that had offered her so little of it before. Her physical wounds had healed, her body strong once more, but this touch, this silent understanding, was the true healing. The world was a blur of muted greens and browns, a confusing symphony of new scents. The ache in her side was a dull throb now, a ghost of the sharper pain she'd known. She was a shadow, a whisper in the dense undergrowth, her wild heart still thrumming with the memory of flight. Then the click, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that was alien to the forest. She froze, a statue carved from fear and instinct, her ears swiveling. A giant, a soft-voiced giant she'd come to associate with the warm bowl of shredded chicken and the odd sweet-smelling rub on her wound was often near. But this was different. This giant held something black and shiny to its face, its eye disappearing behind it. And it didn't smell like the other giants, not exactly. This one carried a different scent, one of clean fabric and a faint, sweet floral note. She watched, a trembling coil of muscle and fur, from the dappled shade of a thicket. Sarah had a gift, not just for seeing, but for truly perceiving. She understood the language of light and shadow, the unspoken narrative in a creature's gaze. The bobcat, a creature of exquisite beauty and profound terror, was her current muse. Steve, the kind giant who seemed to possess an endless supply of patience, had introduced them. Steve, with his gentle murmurings and unwavering calm, had slowly begun to bridge the chasm between the bobcat's wild past and her uncertain future. Sarah's goal was to document this improbable journey, to translate the raw emotion of survival into a visual testament. She knew better than to approach directly, to disturb the fragile peace that was slowly settling over the traumatized animal. Instead, she became another patient observer, her lens a silent eye. She captured the bobcat's initial fear, the almost imperceptible flinches at sudden sounds, the way her muscles tensed, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. It was a dance of caution, a delicate ballet between predator and observer. One afternoon, Steve was inside the large, enclosed outdoor rehabilitation pen, placing a freshly caught rabbit into a hidden feeder. The bobcat, though still cautious, was beginning to associate Steve's presence with sustenance, with comfort. She would watch him from a distance, her pupils dilated, taking in every movement. Sarah, positioned strategically outside the pen, watched too, her finger poised on the shutter. Steve knelt, his back to the bobcat, and as he stood to leave, he paused, looking back. The bobcat, momentarily distracted by the scent of her meal, had lowered her guard just enough. The bobcat's world was slowly expanding. The fear, once a constant companion, now ebbed and flowed, replaced by moments of curious observation. The enclosure, initially a prison, was transforming into a refuge. She learned the rhythms of this new existence, the quiet arrival of food, the soft voices of the giants, the comforting scent of freshly cleaned bedding. Dr. Reed, the other giant, the one with the soft hands and the strange, gentle proddings, had been crucial. The initial sting of the needle had faded into the memory of warmth, of an easing discomfort. The strange-tasting water from the ceramic bowl was always cool and clean, unlike the murky puddle she'd once relied on. She still hissed sometimes when a giant moved too quickly, a vestige of the wildness that still coiled deep within her. But the hisses were less frequent now, more a habit than a genuine threat. Sarah's photographs began to tell a story beyond words. They showed the bobcat's journey from a creature huddled in terror to one cautiously exploring her surroundings. There was a particular shot taken through the mesh of the enclosure, where the bobcat's eyes, once clouded with fear, seemed to hold a flicker of something new. Curiosity, perhaps even a nascent trust. It was a monumental shift. The giant Steve would sit outside the enclosure, sometimes for hours, simply being present, reading a book aloud in a low, soothing voice. The bobcat at first would retreat, but slowly she began to remain, her tail occasionally twitching, her gaze steady. It was in these moments that Sarah truly understood the power of rehabilitation, the profound impact of patience and unwavering compassion. The camera became a conduit for this understanding, an extension of her own empathy. The photographs, at once just a personal project, began to gain traction. Sarah started sharing them, first with Dr. Reed and Steve, then online. People were captivated by the bobcat's story, by the raw vulnerability and astonishing resilience captured through Sarah's lens. The images became a powerful visual narrative of hope, inspiring donations and a new wave of volunteers. Suddenly, the bobcat wasn't just an animal being rehabilitated, she was an ambassador, a symbol of second chances. Her journey, meticulously documented in stunning detail, resonated deeply. Sarah's involvement hadn't just added an artistic dimension. It had given the bobcat a voice, allowing her incredible story to reach beyond the confines of the rescue center, inspiring a wider audience to open their hearts to the quiet miracles happening every day in the world of animal rescue. Her final series of photographs, a testament to the bobcat's blossoming trust, showed her no longer flinching, but approaching, tentatively, cautiously, towards Steve's outstretched hand, her fear replaced by a delicate curiosity, a yearning for connection. A bittersweet current ran through the cool morning air, a premonition the bobcat felt deep in her bone marrow. Freedom, the word, a human construct, was alien to her, yet the feeling it implied, the vastness of wild earth beneath her paws, was a distant memory stirring in her blood. Today, she sensed, was different. The giants moved with a new kind of energy, a quiet reverence that hummed around them like the distant buzz of bees. 2 months had blurred into a steady rhythm of warmth, food, and the soft, rumbling voices of the giants. Her initial terror had slowly receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The ache in her ribs, a dull throb that had haunted her every breath, was gone. The raw, weeping gash on her flank, a constant source of pain, was now a puckered scar, a testament to the harshness of the before and the gentle healing of the known. Her fur, once dull and matted, now gleamed with a rich, tawny luster, each spot a perfect, defiant declaration of life. Steve, the largest and gentlest of the giants, moved with a deliberate slowness that no longer startled her. He would often sit near her enclosure, not attempting to touch, but merely being present. His voice, a low murmur, had become a soothing sound, a counterpoint to the chirping of crickets outside and the rustle of leaves she could hear through the open door of the rehabilitation center. Dr. Reed, the other giant, the one with the sharp, quick hands that had sometimes brought a momentary sting, but always ultimate relief, now approached with a soft smile. The needles no longer brought fear, but a brief, dull prick followed by a feeling of sleepy contentment. She had learned through instinct and repeated experience that these momentary discomforts were precursors to profound relief. The taste of cool, clean water after days of thirst, the rich, meaty scent of a fresh meal after gnawing hunger. These were the lessons the giants had taught her. They were sources of comfort, not threat. The decision had been made, not lightly, but with a shared understanding that this was the ultimate goal. Her wildness, though temporarily contained, was not to be tamed but nurtured and returned. They had chosen a vast protected wildlife sanctuary, miles and miles of untouched forest and sprawling meadows, far from the human world that had once caused her such agony. It was the ideal environment, a place where she could truly be a bobcat again, hunting, roaming, living as nature intended. A new scent filled the air today, a rich, earthy smell, different from the familiar antiseptic tang of her enclosure. It was the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and distant water. A large wooden crate, smelling of fresh wood and the faint musk of other wild creatures, was brought near. Her hackles, once quick to rise, now only twitched with mild apprehension. This was part of the process, she understood, an unfamiliar step in the comforting routine. The giants spoke in low, hushed tones, their faces etched with a poignant mix of joy and sadness. It was the right decision, they knew, but letting go of the creature they had nursed back from the brink was a complex sorrow. Steve knelt, his large hand resting on the crate, not forcing, just being there. He opened the door to her enclosure, then slowly, carefully opened the front of the crate. A gust of cool air, carrying the tantalizing sense of the wild, washed over her. It was a symphony of smells: deer, rabbit, the sharp tang of a distant predator, the sweet perfume of wildflowers. Her ears swiveled, processing the deluge of information. Her muscles tensed, not with fear, but with a primal, instinctual readiness. This was it, the culmination of the rescue, the tender care, the unwavering trust they had built. Her past, a blur of pain and neglect, faded into the background. The gentle giants who had once been fearsome were now protectors, silent witnesses to her return. She took one last deep breath, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of the rehabilitation center, mingled with the invigorating promise of the wild. Then, with a silent, graceful leap, Luna the bobcat emerged from the crate. With a final glance, the bobcat reclaimed her destiny, leaving behind a legacy of hope, a whisper carried on the wind that freedom, once lost, could be found again. Sarah, her camera cradled like a precious extension of her soul, stood beside Steve and Dr. Reed, part of a small, reverent gathering at the edge of the sprawling preserve. The air buzzed with a quiet anticipation, a shared breath held in the face of a miracle. The scent of pine and damp earth filled Whisper's nostrils, a wild symphony her instincts had craved for so long. The metallic cage, a familiar enclosure for what felt like an eternity, was different today. There was an open side, a gaping maw leading to the rustling leaves and whispering trees she remembered from a time before the darkness. Fear, an old companion, coiled in her belly, but beneath it, a new trembling excitement began to unfurl. She'd known the confines, the safe, predictable routine, the giant soft voices and the warmth of their hands, the taste of fresh water, and the sweet relief of food when her body had screamed for it. The very first touch, after the crushing pain and the dizzying confusion, had been terrifying. A strange, sharp sting on her flank, followed by an overwhelming drowsiness. She remembered the world tilting, the ground rushing up, and then the gentle hand, so impossibly large, lifting her, placing her on something soft. The pain in her leg, a relentless or burning throb, had slowly dulled. Days blurred into a cycle of quiet discomfort, and then gradually a burgeoning sense of peace. The giant with the kind eyes of Steve would sit near her, talking in low, soothing tones, and eventually the fear had receded enough for her to watch him, to discern the gentle intent in his every movement. She remembered the taste of the warm, mushy food, so much better than the scraps she'd once scrounged, and the sensation of cool, clean water sliding down her parched throat. The giant's touch, initially a source of panic, had become a subtle comfort, a reassurance that the pain would lessen, the hunger would pass. The air outside the cage was different, alive with 1,000 scents she'd almost forgotten. Deer, rabbit, the rich smell of decaying leaves and the damp earth. Her paw, the one that had been so terribly wounded, now felt strong, capable. She flexed her toes, the pads meeting the rough ground outside the crate. A powerful surge of instinct, dormant for so long, ignited within her. This was her world. The giant's voice, Steve's voice, was a low rumble behind her, a sound she now associated with safety, with healing. She turned her head, her gaze sweeping over the small huddle of figures. Steve, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Dr. Reed, her expression of quiet pride. And the woman with the strange black box, Sarah, who had watched her so often. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a farewell, and perhaps a thank you that transcended species. And then with a powerful surge, a burst of raw, untamed energy, Whisper sprang forward. The forest floor welcomed her, the rustle of leaves beneath her paws a joyous symphony. She was a blur of tawny fur and powerful muscle, a flash of spotted wildness disappearing into the protective embrace of nature. Each bound was a testament to her recovery, each breath a celebration of her freedom. The wind, once a cold reminder of her vulnerability, now carried the intoxicating promise of new hunts, new territories, a new life. The memory of the pain, the fear, the crushing weight of her injuries receded like a distant nightmare. She was whole again. She was home. Sarah's shutter clicked, freezing the breathtaking moment, immortalizing Whisper's return to freedom. The image, even before she saw it, was etched in her heart. A wild spirit reclaiming its birthright, a beacon of hope for all creatures who had known suffering. Steve stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the shared emotion. Dr. Reed's eyes, usually so clinically focused, were glistening. The release wasn't just an animal returning to the wild. It was a profound emotional climax, a powerful visual representation of triumph over adversity, of the enduring bond forged through compassion. It was a rebirth, not just for Whisper, but for the human souls who had dedicated themselves to her healing. The forest, now silent once more, seemed to hum with her renewed energy. Whisper was gone, not truly gone, but simply back where she belonged. Her journey from the brink of death to this moment of triumphant liberation was a testament to the resilience of life and the transformative power of human kindness. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the damp earth, a new chapter began, both for the Bobcat who had found her way home and for the hearts she had touched along the way. The memory of the snare was a phantom ache, a whisper in the wind that rustled the tall grasses. The Bobcat felt it less now, a dull thrum deep in her flank where the plastic had bitten deepest. Her fur had grown back, a luxurious, mottled tapestry of browns and grays. But beneath it, the faint, silvery lines remained. Proof not of weakness, but of survival. She was a ghost in her own landscape, moving with a silent grace that spoke of hard-won freedom, a testament to the giants who had pulled her from the jaws of a plastic death. The first few weeks after her release had been a blur of instinct and wariness. The scent of human hands, though now associated with soft food and gentle touches, still triggered a primal urge to flee. But the sanctuary was vast, a patchwork of forest and open meadow, and the food appeared regularly, placed discreetly in hollow logs or beneath dense thickets. Clean water, too, always flowed, tasting sweet and pure, a stark contrast to the stagnant, tainted pools she'd once desperately sought. She remembered the metallic tang of the strange water the giant had offered, the burning in her paw from the tiny prick, then the deep, dreamless sleep that had smoothed the ragged edges of her pain. When she awoke, the constant, grinding agony was gone, replaced by a dull ache that lessened with each passing sun. The giants, once terrifying silhouettes, now felt more like distant, benevolent presences. Steve, the biggest and kindest of the giants, often saw her. Not close, never close enough to spook her, but from a distance, through the lens of a spotting scope or a fleeting glimpse as she darted across a clearing. He knew her by the way her left ear tilted just so, by the specific pattern of spots on her shoulders. Her scars, fading with each passing month, were a testament to her ordeal and to the meticulous, painstaking work of Dr. Reed and her team. They were symbols not of weakness, but of an enduring spirit. These sightings, occasional and precious, confirm what they all hoped. Bobcat was thriving. She hunted, she slept, she navigated her territory with the confidence of a creature reclaiming her rightful place. The memory of her rescue, however, had burned itself into the heart of the community. What one Bobcat endured, others might suffer. Steve, a man who rarely spoke without deep consideration, began to speak often about the plastic serpent that had nearly claimed her. Dr. Reed, her voice usually calm and clinical, now spoke with passionate urgency about the invisible threat that choked their wild places. They formed a group, at first small, then growing steadily. Volunteers dedicated to the tedious, often disheartening task of cleaning the forest. Bobcat watched them from the safe distance of the tree line, a flicker of movement in the shadowed emerald. The giants, they were different now. They moved with purpose, not to catch, but to gather. They bent and collected, their large hands carefully sweeping away the strange, brittle debris that sometimes tangled itself in the roots of trees. She couldn't understand why they did it, only that the forest slowly, imperceptibly grew cleaner. The sharp, unnatural glint of plastic became less frequent, replaced by the earthy tones of fallen leaves and rough bark. The air seemed to taste purer. The ground beneath her paws felt more organic. The rescue of one bobcat, a solitary wild creature, had blossomed into something larger, something enduring. Her scars, once a source of excruciating pain, were now an emblem of a renewed commitment, a quiet, insistent echo that resonated through the community. The wilderness, once seen as an endless, resilient entity, was now understood as fragile, deserving of vigilant protection. Bobcat, the bobcat, lived freely, her spirit untamed, a vibrant thread in the tapestry of the wild. And in the quiet vigilance of the human giants who kept her forest clean, her legacy lived on, a hopeful promise whispered on the wind through the pines. The healing wasn't just hers, it was theirs too, a shared journey towards a more compassionate world. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 if you're moved or 0 if you're speechless. Thanks for watching until the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more magical stories. See you next time.